So creating a DocAssemble interview from scratch is not always the way to go. If you have an existing form or a template in a Word document that you want to use, that you're going to fill out based upon questions you might ask in a guided interview, then the best way to get started is probably using a tool we call the Weaver. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through how to use that tool, and your job is to go ahead and do that along with me. You'll end up producing a bit of output that I'll ask you to upload for your week's work. But before you come into class, I'm going to ask you then to have a little brainstorming idea, because we'll actually do something in class together based upon this work, and I'll explain that at the end of this video. So let's go ahead and share the screen. I'll share my screen, and we'll get you started. Okay. The link to this documentation should be below this video. And so here I am in the Authoring Your Interview section of the documentation. It has some general discussion about planning your interview, but what we're going to be interested in is the idea of working with an existing PDF file. So if you look here at working with existing PDFs, it's going to tell you a little bit about them. The key thing, it takes a little bit of work up front, but then save you a bunch of work on the back end, is taking your PDF and adding fillable fields to that PDF and naming them using a naming convention that we've developed. You can also do this with Word files and insert variables in the Word files using a naming convention that we developed. And what that will get you is that when the Weaver takes in the form, it'll say, oh, this thing is named in a way that I know it's a name. This thing is named in a way that I know it's an address. This thing is a telephone. This thing is a date. This thing is a signature. And because of that, the template that it will produce, the prototype interview based upon that form, will already have a lot of the logic and the structure that you want it to have. So we have a bank of questions for things like addresses, names, that sort of thing. And so we can just say, oh, well, this looks like a name. Let's ask the name question. This looks like an address. Let's ask the address question. And so instead of having to invent those from scratch, you can leverage all the work that we've done on other forms to get your first version of your form up and running real quickly. And that's what the Weaver does. It takes in a form that you have pre-processed by putting these labels on it, and it produces a prototype DocAssemble interview, which should be able to actually fill in that form with the answers someone would give to DocAssemble. So very much like the example you saw up above in the first video in this level. So here we're talking about working with PDFs. What we're going to do today is you're not going to have to label a PDF yourself. We're going to start with a pre-labeled one. And I'd like you just to follow along and get the output. I'll be asking you to turn in that output as part of your week's project. So this is just for illustration. You don't have to do much here. I'll tell you when you do have to start doing stuff. But here in the working with PDF, you would obviously have to pre-process the form. We use this if you don't have Adobe professionally. You can use this PDF editor from Document. And what you do there is you just drag and drop the form in here, and then you can rename it. So let's actually get a form to do something with. And so we'll actually go ahead. There's some discussion here of how to work with docx files. But there's a discussion here about labeling your fields. And when you're using the interview, Weaver rather, you need to go through and you need to name things using our name convention. So it looks for things like names, addresses, and if you scroll down, you'll see that we define them in certain ways. And so we'll talk about people as users, and you can give them different attributes. You can say, this is a user, this is their name, this is their address, etc., etc. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you don't need to worry about this right now because we're going to use a pre-cooked form. But if you decide for your final project to do something with the assembly line, then you'll want to familiarize yourself with these. We're actually going to go ahead and use up top here. There's a fully labeled PDF. So you can just go ahead and click on that, download that. And you'll get the PDF. You want to actually save that to your downloads folder, your desktop, or wherever. And then what you can do is you do not have to do this. You do not have to move it over here into the PDF editor, but I'm going to do this just so you can see what it does. Say I've uploaded it. I have permission to use this. And then when you go in here, when you're in the document editor, you want to go ahead on the field names. You want to go to original PDF names because it tries to rename them. It tries to be clever and rename them. Here are the names that we gave these fields. And so these are using the naming convention we already have. If these were not the names in the fields, you would want to rename them, or you can actually use this tool to add new fields. So if this was just a flat PDF without any fillable fields, you could use this tool to do that as well. And you can see that these, are pretty straightforward. So we have the trial court, the docket, the plaintiff, the defendant. And this naming convention is pretty simple in that there's a standard format. You say sort of the thing you're caring about and then the attribute associated with that using an underscore between the two. So that's just to show you what that looks like. Remember, you want to download this form here. That's the form we were just looking at. We don't need to worry about using this editor anymore. I just wanted to show you what the fields were and show you what this editor was and that it existed. It's a free way you can do this if you don't have Adobe. So now that we've downloaded this form, what we're going to do is going to continue into weaving the form using the weaver. And then here you'll see a link to the document assembly line weaver. This is in the weaving your form section of the documentation. And if you click on that, you'll get our weaver. And what we're going to do is we're going to start automation from uploading a form. So you have a couple different options here, but we're going to go ahead and upload start building. So we're going to say we want this to someone to download a completed form. And throughout the weaver is going to ask us questions like that to help figure things out. So I'm just going to drag and drop that same file that I had dropped in the document. I'm going to drop in here. If I had been using document to rename it, I would have downloaded the output from document to change names and then re-uploaded here. And I'm not going to check either of these because I'm actually confident that my fields have been named properly because this is our pre-labeled field. I'll click continue. And then what you're going to see is a set of questions that will be used to help produce. What we're going to do is we'll have a bunch of questions and prompts that'll help us produce our prototype. So here it's just making sure that these are the fields we expect. Since this is the pre-labeled form, pretty much is. These ones in bold are things that DocAssemble already knows about. So it's going to be able to have that pinked question there. And so you can see that's a lot of them here. And so we're just going to go through and we're going to say, yes, all the fields that I thought were there should be there. There are no unexpected fields. And all the reserved fields are bold as I expected. So the ones that I thought it should know about, it did know about. You don't, if you're working with a form of your own, you'd of course obviously want to answer those questions here. And you can see a little preview of the form here. And I'm just going to continue on through here and I click on continue at the bottom. It's going to think about it for just a little bit, and then it's going to ask me to review the form just to make sure that it did a little test. And it's basically, if I click here, I can now see, and I click on this preview, I can now see the form filled out. So I see that before what I had is that blank form, this thing here, has now been filled out. I see there's stuff in here, plaintiff, defendant, username. So actually it's filled it out with the names of the variables. And it's checked all the boxes, and it's inserted a signature in the signature line. One thing, signatures are a special type of field. So if you're adding them in document, you have to add a signature field as opposed to a text field. But that's all described in documentation as well. So here we go. We have everything looks good there. So I can come back and I can say all the checks were checks. Font looked okay. Signature was where I thought it would be. And I can continue. And so that was just the weaver making sure that it actually was able to fill it out. So after having answered the question, it says, hey, it's passed the test. Let's keep going. So I'm going to keep going. And now it's going to ask me a bunch of questions. So it's going to know who is the author of this form? Where is it going to be? Is this going to be in Massachusetts? Is this going to be, and for the document assembly line, the answer is going to be yes. This happens to be a Massachusetts form we're using, so we'll go ahead and say yes to Massachusetts. We have some other options there that might be relevant depending on what form we're working on. The question is this a court-related form? If I say no, then it's going to ask me, is it a letter or some other thing? If I say yes, it's going to go ahead and ask me what's happening here. So starting a new case, well, this is a generic motion in the probate and family court. I'm not going to actually think too much about the answers now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start going through and filling out the answers. This is all going to zoom by at like 3 times speed. But I'm not going to really, I'm not actually going to think much about this. I'm going to sort of just select them. And a key part here is that you can actually tell it how to make the screens. So I just slow down here for a second. I can say I want like these questions be on the screen, on the first screen. And I can click continue. And then it'll show me the remaining questions. So, well, maybe these are the questions that I want on the second screen. Oh, and then these are the questions I want on the third screen. And you can just keep doing that until you get the screens you want. And then you can, actually, if you want, you can reorder those screens and edit things, add some more discussion to it to help orient your user. And it's going to say, here's your whole interview. And then you're going to say, finish, or continue in this case. It's going to think about it, and then it's going to produce your now prototype interview. You can actually download this package. That's what I want you to do. Go ahead and click on download. That'll download as a zip file. That's the file I'm going to want you to upload in association with your week's work. But you can also see, just we can do a little preview here, and that preview shows you what the YAML file looks like. And so since we know that a little bit about the YAML file now, you can see here are some mandatory questions or some mandatory blocks. You scroll down, you're going to see there are a bunch of questions. Here's what's happening on screen 1, screen 2, et cetera, et cetera. And you could now take this package and you actually could upload it to DocAssemble, and it would work, hopefully, and hopefully without any errors. And then you would then be able to go into the YAML, edit it, change some of the language around the questions, reorder the questions. For those questions that weren't in the question bank, you could make up exactly how you want to ask that. And you can turn that into that interview that you really wanted. But that's your project right now. Is just go ahead, walk through this, get the output file, and to answer that in your end of the week work there. And we're going to have fun coming up in class. What I'm going to ask you to do is, now that you know all about DocAssemble, I want you to come to class with an idea for our fictitious law firm of a DocAssemble interview that we could create. Keep in mind that we don't just have to use existing forms that are PDFs. You could actually do this with a Word file as well. So maybe you want to use it to write a motion. So you might ask some questions, and then it will fill in information based upon the motions. You can do full-fledged document automation here, or you could fill out forms. And there's a lot of other things you could do. And so come up with ideas, and what we'll have everyone do is go around, share their ideas. We'll have the partners vote on them. And then we'll actually try to see how quickly we can implement some of those ideas in class when we see you on Monday. And that's your mission.